You opened WhatsApp at least once today without thinking about it. The man who built it applied for a job at Facebook once and got rejected on the spot. 10 years later, he sold that same company his app for $19 billion. Before any of that, he was a teenager in a small Ukrainian town where the phone lines were tapped and speaking freely got you in trouble. His family moved to California with almost nothing, and for years they lived off government assistance. Because somewhere in you there is a version of this story too. A gap between where you started and where you think you're allowed to end up. This isn't a rags to riches highlight reel. It's a lesson about what he actually did in the years nobody was watching. You have an idea, a skill, a thing you could build, but you're waiting for someone to tell you you're ready. A title, a degree, an invitation. You treat starting like it requires a stamp of approval from someone above you. You send one application, get one no, and you take it as data about your worth instead of data about that one moment. You stop retrying the thing that actually mattered and quietly redirect towards something safer. You stay in the job, the routine, the version of your life that doesn't ask much of you, and you call it stability. But stability that never gets tested isn't safety, it's just standing still with a nicer word attached to it. You see the outcome, the number, the headline, and you skip past the part where someone did unglamorous, invisible work for a long stretch of time with no proof it would pay off. You want the ending without agreeing to the middle. You downplay what you actually want because wanting it out loud feels risky. If you don't say it, it can't be used against you later. So you keep your biggest goals folded up small where nobody can see them. If nobody is clapping, you assume it isn't counting. So you chase visible wins, the ones people can see and react to, instead of the private repetitions that actually build a skill worth having. You fill your days with tasks that look like progress, meetings, notifications, small errands, and you never carve out the long, uninterrupted stretch where real work actually gets made. Nobody wakes up one day deciding to wait for permission or fold their ambition in half. It's built quietly out of specific moments that taught you it was a smart way to survive. In his hometown, phone calls were monitored and saying the wrong thing had consequences. He learned early that the safest move was to say less, want less out loud, and keep your real self private. When his family arrived in America, they qualified for food stamps, and his mother took whatever babysitting work she could find. He learned not to expect handouts, not to expect ease, and definitely not to expect a clean path forward. He applied to Facebook, rejected. He applied to Twitter, also rejected. Somewhere along the way, he stopped treating a no as a verdict on his ability and started treating it as just one closed door among many. Maybe it wasn't food stamps or a tapped phone line. Maybe it was a parent who only reacted to mistakes or a room where wanting too much got you laughed at. Somewhere, you learned that staying small was a safer bet. It wasn't weakness that built this pattern in you, it was intelligence, adapting to the actual conditions you grew up in. The problem isn't that you learned it. The problem is that you never went back to check if it's still true. Changing this isn't one decision you make once and it's done. It's a fight you have with yourself repeatedly, usually at the exact moment it would be easiest to quit. While teaching himself to code from used manuals, he worked as a cleaner at a supermarket to help support his family. There was no guarantee any of the late nights with a computer book would ever turn into anything. The app kept crashing. Users were leaving. He nearly gave up on the whole idea and told a friend he was thinking about quitting and finding a regular job instead. That moment is real, and it's usually left out of the highlight reel. Investors wanted him to add ads, wanted him to add games, wanted the thing that makes apps addictive and profitable fast. He said no repeatedly, even when saying yes would have made the immediate pressure disappear. Every time you refuse the easy version of a thing, you give something up. Slower growth, less money now, more criticism, more people telling you that you're being stubborn about nothing. For years, there's no signal telling you this was the right call. You just keep making the harder choice over and over, without a scoreboard confirming it's paying off. Friends took easier jobs, former co workers cashed out early. From the outside, staying stubborn about something unproven looks a lot like stubbornness for no reason, not conviction. Not in some poetic way. In the boring, exhausting way where you lie awake running numbers, wondering if you're one of the many people who tried this and it just never worked out. At some point, you have to stop thinking of yourself as the kid who grew up with nothing and start thinking of yourself as someone allowed to build something big. That shift doesn't happen because of a win. It has to happen before the win, or the win won't stick. Even after his app had hundreds of millions of users, he still lived simply, still avoided attention, still carried the instincts of someone who once had very little. Success doesn't erase the wiring underneath it. When WhatsApp had over 400 million users, it ran on roughly 50 engineers. That wasn't an accident. It was a hard, uncomfortable discipline of refusing to bloat something just because he could afford to. Turning down growth for growth's sake, turning down noise, turning down the version of the story that would look impressive from the outside means fewer people around you understand what you're actually optimizing for. Even at the end, when Facebook offered to buy the company for $19 billion, he had to decide whether to hand over control of something he'd protected fiercely for 5 years. Growth and letting go pull in opposite directions, always. None of this required him to stop being who he was. He didn't become loud or flashy or comfortable with constant exposure. He built something enormous while staying exactly as private and careful as the childhood that shaped him. Where you began tells you what you had to work with. It does not tell you what you're capable of building from here. Those are two completely different questions, and it's easy to accidentally answer the second one using only the first. When Facebook rejected him for a job, he didn't take it as proof. He wasn't good enough. He kept building, and years later, he was the one being quoted by that same company. One rejection is a data point, never the whole verdict. You don't have to become someone loud to build something big. He built one of the most used pieces of software on earth while staying almost entirely out of the public eye. Quiet and ambitious can be the same person. The floor scrubbing, the self taught coding manuals, the crashing app nobody used yet. That stretch is not the warm up before the real story starts. That stretch is the real story. The $1 billion sale was just the moment it became visible. Refusing ads, refusing games, refusing the fast version of growth wasn't stubbornness for its own sake. It was a filter that kept the product true to what it actually needed to be. Learn to ask what you're protecting when you say no. 50 engineers supporting hundreds of millions of people is not a limitation story, it's proof that focus beats headcount. You don't need more people or more resources to move forward. You need less noise. When the WhatsApp deal was finalized, he chose to sign it outside the very building where he used to line up for food stamps as a teenager. That wasn't for a headline, it was for himself. A private way of closing a loop only he fully understood. Years after the sale, he left Facebook over disagreements about how user data would be used, walking away from a large amount of unvested compensation to do it. Protecting what he believed in mattered more than the number on the page. He later put tens of millions of dollars into a foundation supporting private, encrypted messaging, the same value he'd been protecting since he was a teenager with a tapped phone line. The wealth was a tool, not the point. What are you waiting for permission to start? A business, a conversation, a move, a piece of work you've been sitting on because nobody official has told you you're allowed. Somewhere, there's a no you took too personally, a closed door you decided was final, instead of just one attempt among many you were allowed to keep making. An ambition you folded down to a size that feels safe to admit out loud, because a smaller goal is easier to defend if someone questions it. The unglamorous, boring repetitions that don't look like progress, but actually are. The ones you've been avoiding because they don't give you anything to show anyone yet. Growing your following, your team, your workload, when what would actually move you forward is doing less, better, with the people and resources you already have. He walked away from money to protect a principle. You don't need a $19 billion decision to practice that. You need one smaller version of it this week in something you actually control. Whatever shaped you, the scarcity, the silence, the rejection, it explains where you started. It was never going to be the full explanation for where you end up. That part is still being written by what you do next. Sit with that question, honestly, without rushing to answer it the comfortable way. The door most people are waiting on isn't locked. Nobody is holding the key but you. Not the giant leap, just one honest, uncomfortable move this week. The conversation, the application, the first rough attempt, the thing you've been keeping folded up small. Every week, one more real story. broken down the same honest way. So you can keep checking your own patterns against people who actually lived through this.